Whenever you listen, watch, or play through any story, there is always going to be a divide between what you know and what the story's creator does. This isn't a linear process of learning either, whereby when you finish the story, you know absolutely everything that the creator knows, as there's an entire world in the background of the story's setting. No story, no matter how epic in scale, can ever encompass every aspect of a continually evolving world in the storyteller's head. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today I want to discuss the difference between those two types of lore and their importance to how a good story is told. I'll be focusing most of my attention to gaming examples, as they're a little more unique by virtue of being an interactive medium, which also contains visual, audio, and written pieces of lore within them. To start, let's go through a couple of definitions I'll be using, and where better to start than with the video title that brought you here today. Story lore refers to everything that your character or your perspective knows. It's everything that the creator wants to show you about the universe and everything that makes the story itself impactful. In games, however, this story lore can be further broken down into two elements: obvious and optional. Obvious lore is what every player will learn in the course of just following the main story, while optional lore comes from physically going off the beaten path, going through collections, finding secrets, reading journals, side quests, and the list goes on and on all the ways games have come up with to let players in on the lore. I think my favourite example of this has to come from vanilla World of Warcraft, whereby if you set your sound settings to 0%, except for ambience, around the upper parts of the Undercity, you'll be able to hear the ghostly whispers of Arthas's return to Lordaeron and then the murdering of his father. A plot point which helps give context to the world, but in itself isn't fundamentally required for anything your character would do in that world. Then you have world lore, being effectively everything about the universe. How magic works, the history of gods, or what the Emperor's favourite brunch option is. A lot of things which don't need to be explained to you for the story to work. And if anything, too much information too quickly muddies the waters, which can lead to a less impactful story. The importance of having this established world lore, however, is that it gives the creator a rule set on which to work from, which makes the story elements more consistent. Whilst the players might not know the full extent of how consistent or the rules themselves, when there isn't these fundamental laws of physics in a world, it can really start to show as the story progresses. So why does this matter? What point do I have to make it? Why are you still here? Well, first, thank you for making it this far, and if you have, please like and subscribe below. But the reason why this is relevant is that it directly impacts how you invest yourself in the story and the world as a whole. The story needs to be able to bring the player in and get them interested. In gaming terms, the obvious draws the interest into the world, which incentivizes them to do the optional stuff, and the more they learn and the more they get invested, the more likely they are to engage with the world itself. This has the bonus of them interacting with the community as a whole, potentially buying books, movies, or other sources of the story just to learn more about that world. For a brief literary example, this is someone watching the Lord of the Rings movies, then reading the books, and then the Silmarillion. To tie this together a bit more, I'd like to offer two examples of story versus world lore done very well, and another where it's done very poorly. Both from World of Warcraft's narrative. Don't worry, you don't need to know anything about WoW to get my point. This isn't a lore video after all. I'll just be hitting the relevant story beats in the story, going through the obvious, the optional, and the world, then showing how this impacts you as a player. So we'll start with the good, in the story of Cthun, the last boss of the third big raid in vanilla World of Warcraft. This character is an old god who commands a legion of insectoid race known as the Silithids, who have hive bases throughout the continent of Kalimdor, who is fundamentally hostile to the world and the player. Now, to get into the raid and kill him, there's no previous questing requirements. You can just rock up to the raid at max level and go through and kill him. So, that's where we'll start. As everyone has to go through the raid to fight Cthulhu, we can consider everything in there as part of the obvious lore to what he is. The first thing that will hit you is the visual storytelling. With the raid taking on a ton of aesthetic inspiration from ancient Egypt, we can date it as very, very old. Secondly, not is it only of Egyptian origin, it's clearly designed as a temple of some description, which means there's a religious element to it. Thirdly, as we descend into the hive, we can determine that these creatures have made their home here. so they are likely as old as the main structures. And then, lastly, are the bosses and the enemies themselves. These creatures are totally alien, seem designed to mess with the minds of mortals or devour them outright. In fact, one of the bosses is a family of such bug creatures that when you kill one, the other two devour their freshly slain kin just to get more powerful. Such cannibalism being completely in the camp of evil behaviour, just to truly emphasise the type of foe we face. Beyond the visual storytelling, there's a few voice lines which come up from some of the few bosses blessed with mouths. The first is Prophet Sekharam, using his final breath to tell us that we only delay the inevitable. Battleguard Satura declares that we will be judged for defiling sacred grounds, and that the law of the ancients will not be challenged. The Twin Emperors talk about us as mortals, prey, a feast of souls for them. But lastly, when we enter the room of those two emperors, we get our first glimpse of Cthun. The massive floating eyeball in the centre of the chamber turns its gaze upon you. You stand before a god. It's not long after we face him. Massive, imposing, an eldritch monstrosity. He doesn't say anything. No shouts or yell of defiance to you or your whole party. No, he's far more subtle than that. Cthun whispers straight into your ear. Is it the same thing everyone else hears, or just you? How could you ever tell? But as you fight, hearing this entity from beyond using a simulacrum of human speech tell you your friends will abandon you, your courage will fail, or you're already dead. It just lends more evidence to the fact that this thing must be stopped. So just from the obvious, we know a few things about Cthun. He's ancient. He's a god who is worshipped by the Silithids. He tries to corrupt the mind with inhuman whispers, and ultimately wants to devour the souls of mortals. None of these can be explained in any more depth than the fairly limited scope of the raid itself, but stopping an evil death god is a pretty self-explanatory reason for your character to fight him, and the stakes are fairly clear. Of course there's more though, as we move up to the optional lore, and boy howdy is there an absolute ton of it. So much so I won't be able to go through all of it in any depth, but I'll skim through the basics. First are a series of quests you can do while you level. And as we mentioned, there are many Silithid hives throughout the continent, and in places of varying levels. So, as you side quest through these hives, you can help a researcher, and you slowly learn more about the physiology of the Silithids being almost designed for war, and about their more religious practices, culminating to the conclusion that we must prepare now for something dark coming out of the sands of Silithus. And as we head to the sands of that dark place to investigate further, we can come across a team of archaeologists, and near the end of a quest chain we decipher an old tablet containing the prophecy of Cthun. It mentions that millennia ago a creature of unimaginable evil and power battled a titan, one of the creators of the universe, in this land millennia ago. Although managing to potentially fell the titan, Cthun was imprisoned in turn, and is laid dormant beneath the world waiting to return. Although imprisoned, he was not powerless, and using his corrupting influence found the Silithids, then twisted them in his image to serve as his tool of vengeance. This vengeance coming later once the Titans had all but abandoned the planet, in the form of the First War of the Shifting Sands, which pushed back massive mortal armies and was only eventually crushed by the help of dragons. There are more quest lines and the war effort itself, which requires the entire server to contribute resources before you start the Second War of the Shifting Sands, although none of this provides any more information, just more specifics about the dragons who helped, and adds to the gravity of everyone uniting to fight this threat. But no new information on our antagonist. We are one level up from the obvious. We've gone from just an evil death god to an evil death god who has fought the creators of the universe to a standstill, has the power to twist the forms and souls of an entire race, and finally, already tried to take some revenge, which only ended when the most powerful creatures still left on Azeroth combined their powers with the mortal armies of the elves, without whom this world would already have been destroyed. Now, not only do we know Cthun is evil, and must be stopped, the stakes are even higher. And if we can't defeat him here and now, then he'll eventually rebuild his armies, and just try again later. And so we move up the next level. Beyond this, we have the world lore, which normally we wouldn't 100% know about, but in this case of World of Warcraft, which has entire wikis, YouTube channels, books and the chronicles, we can say with pretty solid certainty we know the world lore around Cthun. To expand further, he is one of the many old gods who were thrown into the universe by a powerful race known as the Void Lords. The purpose of these Void Lords is to destroy the universe, as they exist outside of it and want everything to return to that void. To do that, they want to corrupt Titans, who are planet-sized entities with godlike powers. They are born from what are effectively eggs, and those eggs are planets. Not all planets are Titan eggs, but Azeroth happens to be one, so Cthun and his friends are trying to corrupt the very soul of the planet itself to help destroy the universe. He's done this through corrupting the elements themselves and fighting a war with the Titans. The Titan mentioned in the prophecy was one of the greater champions, but not an actual Titan itself, but still a creature of immense world-defining power. Cthun and the old gods can't actually be killed, as frankly they're not exactly alive to begin with. As they are eldritch horrors, when you destroy their physical shell, they will eventually reconstitute themselves, as they have already dug their claws so deep into Azeroth that to pry them out now would almost kill the Titan within. And so there you have it, the 3 levels of lore about Cthun, without going into nearly as much depth as you could. To bring it back to the original point on why this lore is done really well, you can see that the summary is that the obvious lore gives you the basics on what Cthun is, why he needs to die, and is interesting enough that you want to go out and seek more information in the optional lore section. Then, the optional adds tons of flavour, hype, it raises the stakes, and really highlights, okay, I want to learn even more about this person. And then you get to the world lore, and that comes as a helpful guide on how all this works, fills in details that we would otherwise not get to see, and frankly, this is how it should be. Every player needs to know why they're doing something in the world, so it has to be obvious. Not every player cares about all the details, but there is plenty to explore still if you want to go out and hunt for it, which makes it interesting. And for the people not yet satisfied, they can go further and read even more about this old god or any other story that occurs. It's nice, even story progression built from a solid story core, which is that obvious lore. It's this core which is the most important part, I find, as it provides the player with both the foundational knowledge of their actions, but also the incentive to actually learn more, and in so doing, engage with the world at large. Without this obvious storytelling, all the optional and world content either falls over, or is missed by players who aren't engaged enough to care to search it out. Especially when it gets so convoluted, you need to watch entire videos on a topic which just draw inspiration from multiple sources, both in and out of game, to explain what's going on. It's this exact thing which is currently going on with World of Warcraft's main narrative with their lead protagonist, Sylvanas Windrunner. I'll start by saying the WoW lore currently in Shadowlands is surprisingly solid as a whole, but that's only if you have been consuming every last piece of optional and world lore that's become available in the last 3 expansions, Legion, Battle for Azeroth, and now Shadowlands. With all that extra information, Sylvanas' actions make a degree of sense, and I'm sure they'll even be able to go a long way to justify why she turned on the jailer in their next book after her namesake. But to a person just playing through the story, it makes a grand total of no sense. What we've seen from Sylv is someone who has committed genocide, started a world war with the express reason of sending souls to hell to serve the jailer who is soul-powered Satan. Then, Force Anduin, a character we've spent a good amount of time building up and who people really like, to serve the jailer as a mindless, personalityless puppet. Then at the end of the last raid, when Zerval the jailer says, "Now I can make everything serve," she has a PTSD flashback and turns on him in a very, very lazy way. This is why the latest cinematic has gotten wider gaming coverage, as most people either don't care or actively hate it, like myself. As you'd expect, a character which would be triggered by the word serve to have already had one of those flashbacks already, like when she herself said it when she converted Anduin to the cause. Frustratingly, This could have easily been solved by just spending more time with the Lady Windrunner. Have her pop up during the leveling story as Arthas did in Wrath of the Lich King. As the story is so linear, it would be relatively easy to have her and the jailer come up for a bit and explain what's going on or what their reasoning is. There is a great deal of fundamental, universe-defining stuff going on, but as none of it's obvious, the aforementioned core of the player's story experience, nobody wants to go on to all of the optional stuff. We don't fully grasp why we're doing things, and no one wants to have to spend money on books or do their homework to understand what's going on. Cthun is a big evil god who needs to die, otherwise he'll wage war on everything. Simple. Sylvanas has been serving the jailer for years now, but when he says that everything will serve, betrays him instantly because she doesn't serve. Confusing. One's easy to follow because at its core, it's obvious. Everyone can plainly see and understand, while the other makes no sense without all of the extra content associated with the world. So just to be obvious myself in my conclusions at the end here, and congratulations again for making it this far, the core story experience must be obvious. You have to give players the basic understanding on what's happening, why they're doing what they're doing, and without this core understanding, the amount of players which will search the game for optional lore decreases, which then decreases the amount of people who will search for the world lore. As less and less people care about what's going on, less people will engage with it, they'll engage less with the community and with the creators themselves. And that's ultimately always to the detriment of the game. Give the players the straightforward smack in the head to get them to focus, not just stand in front of them with your corkboard filled with millions of pictures and connections trying to explain to people using a million different sources what's going on. Thank you all for joining me on what's become a bit of a video essay. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. If I've overstepped anywhere, any examples of this done really well or poorly, or just things that you think I may have missed. I'll pretty much make sure to read as much as I can. For now though, please again like and subscribe below, and I hope you all have a fantastic week. Thanks all.